All right, guys, welcome to the Camo and Win podcast. I'm your host, Kyler Galaski, and Linden Lauren is with us today. He's the founder of the company, actually. So we're going to talk a little bit about bear hunting and some tactics Linden's used and some experiences and just kind of get into it. So,
thanks for having me. Let's have a bear conversation.
yeah, let's do it.
Gosh, where do we start with bear hunting? There's a lot of things. It seems like it's becoming a little bit more prevalent now because of media. But it seems like the most frequently asked question is like, how do I get into it? And I would say, one is ask yourself why you want to get into it first, and then kind of just build off from there. Because it seems like it's just like anything else, hunting elk, deer. There's like resources galore, books, podcasts, movies, all that stuff. Lots of hunters that have been doing it for longer than me, decades. And then you can kind of get into the weeds of things. But asking yourself why, for me personally, it's a combination. One, it's definitely for the resource side of food, which I don't know what it is, but this last fall, my wife and I enjoyed the bear more than the black-tailed deer. And I don't know if that's because of the meatloaf recipe we have or what, but I almost was like, I don't even want to hunt deer anymore. Maybe it's because the deer was in the rut. You know?
I've heard a lot of people say bear doesn't taste good, and then other people are like, oh, it's the best meat there is, so...
Yeah, I think it just has to do with how it's prepped. Because Dylan will do a rack of ribs, and it looked unbelievable when I saw the pictures of it. And I've had his canned bear, and it was like a combination of ribeye and pulled pork. Cold, I didn't even heat it up. But the meatloaf recipe we had this year was frickin'... My son was eating that up, and I'm like...
Loving it.
He's like, well, I want more bear. I'm like, you can only get a bear, so...
Yeah.
You can't get it all the time, if you get lucky. But I think just asking yourself why you want to get into it. It's definitely the meat, but I think additionally for me, it's the challenge because it's such a different species to hunt. They're not going to be in herds.
Right.
It's not like a pack of bears. Sure, there might be a mom bear with cubs, and that's something, but it's just a different species. They hide in thick underbrush cover. They have this weird hibernation period where they go into caves, and then their young are birthed during that time frame of January, February. They also have a rut, just like elk and deer.
Interesting.
But there's this different time span. It's like they go into hibernation, then the spring happens. That's when spring season hunts start. And they come out and then they eat grass and plant matter, which is like most of their diet. And then the fawns drop, and then that's like their first protein source. So mid-May to July. And I think somewhere in that time frame is where the rut is in mating season, depending on the environment and like the state and all. And I'm sure it differs for each state because I only have experience in Oregon and Idaho.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, do all bears hibernate in Oregon, like on the west side? Because I've seen them in December, January, out and about. Yeah,
I can't elaborate on that. I think someone should I should talk to a biologist because I've seen bears in November, and then I've heard a professional who's been in the industry for a while say that it depends on the environment, and maybe in that zone all of them are. It's kind of mixed. I haven't had like a conclusion to what that looks like,
Right.
I don't know how Idaho differs than Oregon because I've just spent so much time obviously hunting in the home state for bears. So
that's part of your why, but was there anything that inspired you to start bear hunting? I know your dad did a lot of bear hunting when you were a kid growing up.
Yeah. I guess you could say it started at the age of 2. I was brought to archery camp by my parents and friends, and there's numerous pictures of me on my dad's shoulders on top of a bearskin that he just recently harbored. And that was kind of his niche. He hunted elk and deer and found success, but that was kind of his specialty. He brought a lot of people up and was teaching them. At the time, you could bait too. I think you could bait up until like 1984, which, is another argument in itself, whether it's conservation based or not, depending on who you ask. Right. That could be a whole nother podcast in itself. But at the time you could. So I know he was doing that a lot. He was doing some spot and stock. He had a little bit of a background guiding bear hunting in Alaska for a while. So he went up there and did that and then came back and brought some of his tactics. Cool. So you could say like at an early age, I was just exposed.
Right.
Even behind our house, we had public land, and he would harvest a bear, bring it down on a carport, and skin it, and we would get the meat, and the skull would be there, and I was just walking out 2 or 3 years old, and like this was just a normal environment for me. But it makes sense now because most of the nightmares I had to do with bears breaking in the front door.
Gotcha.
Every single time, standing up, breaking in, then I'd wake up. Dumping sweat, and then run upstairs with my parents. It makes sense because like I saw it so much. Mm-hmm. So it started early on, and I was around. My brother did it too, and all of his friends. And this camp had like 15 to 20 people. I mean, it was like a big camp,
right?
And they were successful every year.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where it started, and then, I don't know if it was a focus in high school growing up, like once you become of legal age to be able to actually hunt, because I obviously wasn't hunting at 2 or 3. It was more blacktail was like my main focus, but that's because everyone that I knew did that the most.
Rifle blacktail.
Yeah, black. Yeah, let's clarify. Rifle blacktail, not archery.
Yeah.
I mean, I did other styles of hunting, but it seemed like all my buddies growing up on the west side of Oregon, it was rifle blacktail. And so that was kind of the focus. So it wasn't like a huge desire. I'm like actively like looking for bears, Mm-hmm. But that's kind of how it started. The whole getting comfortable in that environment and what it looked like, and just being right at the front doorstep of skinning and bear meat and and skulls everywhere and all that kind of stuff.
You just had a ton of exposure to it.
Oh, I mean, It was like, every year. Growing up, I mean, like that was a normal occurrence in the fall. Yeah.
Cool. I had some questions actually. I was just gonna kind of lead with, I guess. So, like, you found success this year. You killed a couple bears. You've killed numerous bears in the past, but like maybe fill us in on like what happened this year and what you looked for and the tactics you used and how you found success.
Yeah. I'll start with kind of maybe some ground rules of things to kind of look for, and then I can kind of dive into like what happened this fall. Mm-hmm. From my understanding, based off like speaking with other individuals who've done it for a long time, Dylan being out in the woods all the time and reading books and, all those things comprised, it seems to me that if you can identify the food source for whenever you're going to specifically be hunting them, that is kind of the main driver. So from my understanding, it's water, cover, and food. And those are the 3 components that are kind of the main frame of hunting bears. So if you can figure out where like a really thick covered area is, mm-hmm. a water source, and then whatever food they're at during that specific time frame, then you can most likely find bears.
Right. And it changes throughout the year.
It changes, yeah. So like the spring, like I said, they're coming out of hibernation, so they're feeding maybe, and this is Oregon speaking, maybe they're feeding out in like, some grassy knolls and stuff like that, having plant matter. And then kind of as the spring goes, then they do look for their first protein source, which could be, a fawn dropping or so on and so forth.
Right.
And then in the fall, in August, which is when the season starts, I think it's like August 1st, mm-hmm. it goes, to berries at high elevation, huckleberries, blackberries, and creek bottoms.
Yeah.
Because it's dark, lots of cover, lots of food.
Cooler, probably.
Yeah. Very little human interaction.
Right.
Yeah.
No one wants to go down in there.
No one wants to go down. So that's where you'll find them. And then, as the fall goes on, there's different berries that ripen. Sure, they might knock down a stump or two or tear some bark off to get that cambium layer. Deep barking trees. So they'll get some of that. They'll dig for grubs and stumps. But then as that fall goes, the acorns drop specifically. I'm talking west side of Oregon.
Right.
And then they'll kind of transition into that, and then that'll be like that next food source. So it kind of, I think what would be wise is to really learn about the biology and of what they're feeding on, and that means talking to a game warden, talking to the biologist in that specific zone that you're going to be planning on hunting, and then figuring out like, hey, where do you typically see, just, getting some tidbits of information. What do the food sources look like? Where are you seeing bears often? And stuff like that will give you kind of a good starting point. But it's typically figuring out what food source, if there's some water nearby, and then they like the cover, like just super dense and thick. And that was both the situations for me this year too.
Yeah.
Was both. Yeah.
Down in Southern Oregon. Yeah.
Yep. Southern Oregon. Yeah. And I think if you can really figure out those three components, and then just looking for sign, meaning like fresh droppings, bark that's been ripped off a tree,
right?
Blackberries maybe that have like hair on them or something, or tunnels in the blackberries.
Or you can tell like where they've been eating.
Yeah, where it's like been laying down. Yeah. Just looking for that, you'll get a good feel of like, okay, so there's maybe a bear working in this general vicinity. I don't do a ton of scouting, just because I orchestrate my schedule so that it doesn't come primary compared to other things.
Right.
So my best time to scout is during deer season. So I use deer season hunting as also an additional scouting
for
tool.
Bear.
Yeah.
Okay.
So like I'll be hunting deer, but then I'll also be like, okay, there's 3 piles here, oh, that's weird. There's 3 game trails right next to it. What are they feeding on? What's the droppings look like? What's the berries? What's the time frame? So then I just put that in my Onyx, and I'm like, droppings here. This was the date. So I'm like, I know what the food source is.
Right.
And then I just mark it. So it's kind of a double win. It's like you're hunting deer, but then I'm also like scouting for like the next fall.
Right.
Because I just haven't spent the time. Not that someone shouldn't. They should. I just haven't prioritized that for me.
Right. Have you so if you find those areas and you go in there and you see bears and maybe you shoot a bear and you go in next year, are they going to be in those same areas, do you think?
Good question.
Or do they move quite a bit?
I think it depends. So that's a good question. So I'm going to give you kind of 2 ballpark answers. The first answer is to my understanding, they can have a wide range of travel depending on how much pressure and food sources and what the weather conditions look like. So that's up to debate, like what their radius is, because a lot of different authors and biologists think that their radius is actually like hundreds of miles. Now, obviously that depends on a lot of variables with it. Generally speaking, maybe they're not pressured. Maybe the weather conditions are the same and the feed is always good in that general vicinity, all that stuff. And you could assume maybe that they would come regularly. And I've noticed that on the south side or southwest side is certain zones holding bears. Right. And it's because there's very little human interaction. They got the cover, the water, and the food source, like the trifecta for everything they need.
Yeah, elk on the coast are the same way in regards to like if they use an area or different areas throughout the year, they're going to be there at same time next year.
Yeah.
It's a part of their pattern. It's like their house.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would look at it very similar to for bears, it's just like figuring, that's why I think it's important just to mark it on Onyx. This was going to be the first year ever that I'm going to run game cameras.
Yeah.
And I specifically for these bear zones that I've seen bears. So it'll be interesting because that'll be kind of my scouting way to not have to be in the woods. Not that I don't want to be. I just am not prioritizing it. But it'll give me at least a little bit of details.
Right.
But I know that July is going to look way different in October.
Right.
Because of food sources. That's why I like in deer season to be also scouting.
Right. Well, and like every year is different. So like some years, like this year, we got a ton of rain.
Yeah.
So things are going to be pretty green probably. And then there was like a couple of years ago, we didn't get rain for like 2 months straight. And
that was like beginning of November is like when it
Yeah.
started. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. The climate change is unpredictable at best. So then you have to go off that. But ultimately it comes down, like, I just think always resorting to the 3 things that they require and then looking for sign in your specific zone wherever you're hunting throughout the state. And you'll probably be in a pretty good spot.
Okay.
Looking, especially just... I once read in a book by Douglas Bose. He has a great book on bear hunting. He looks at it like almost like a crime scene investigator when you're like looking for sign. He's like, oh, so this is kind of, I see some hair on these blackberry bushes, or oh, it's eating these berries at really high altitude, and it's kind of on this east side and not the south side facing slope or whatever. And documenting that, he has like a notepad or so on and so forth,
right?
Documenting it, and then he just got like all this intel to come back and be like, okay, so generally this is kind of, and I feel like if you use that approach, you could probably get pretty consistent, depending on how picky you are, and if you're only specifically looking for borers, and what tool is your preference, stuff like that.
So are you doing a lot of spot and stock, or is it glassing, or are you like down in the bottoms? Like, what's your
in the depths of Davy Jones' locker?
Yeah. Like, do you have a plan when you go out? Like, you're like, hey, I'm gonna be in the oaks today, just like stalking the timber, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So I'll start with spring, which I haven't hunted Oregon spring, only Idaho. And that approach where we hunt like on these cliffs and stuff is purely glassing, because it's just pretty open country. It's cliffs, it's tall. So we're like looking for them to come out of their dens, and we're glassing. So that's a different approach. Oregon, it just depends. It's kind of going back to when I'm going out. So when we go out in August, I won't take you guys in the oaks, most likely, because they're just not falling at that point.
Right.
So we're going to be looking a little bit higher up for maybe some berries and such like that, in those areas.
High grasses, the meadows.
Yeah, high grasses. And we'll probably go in like some creek bottoms, some areas where we can kind of get close. Those would kind of be the two approaches, just because one, it's going to be really freaking hot. So if it is blazing hot, maybe those creek bottoms
are gonna hold them.
Yeah, might hold them. Sure, they might be at high elevation when it's hot, but it's because the food source. If they're not there, I'm going straight to the creek bottom. So I think it just depends on when you're gonna go. In August, that's what the approach I would probably use. And then September, sure, the berries are up at higher elevation. Maybe they're coming down a little bit. And then as soon as the rains hit, especially in the last few years, and speaking with a variety of individuals, reading, all that stuff. And Dylan's really good at this, is like kind of understanding when that transition is from berries to the acorns. And I think it's like after a few rains. It seems to me, and maybe it changed. It's not like October 12th, it changes. But like as soon as it starts raining, and then you go like check an oak patch, and there's oaks everywhere, or acorns everywhere dropped. And you just look around for sign, and you're like, well, there's 7 piles.
Right. That's a good indication that they're moving. And
maybe the transition's starting. Not that you won't find them out in clearings, because you do find them in clear cuts even October and November if you're hunting private lands.
Right.
Because there's food out there. It seems to me when I see them in clear cuts, though, they're not just like
meandering,
feeding one spot.
Right.
They're like feed, walk, and they're going from like a creek bottom to like timber.
I remember when we were down south on that blacktail hunt, Dylan glassed up that bear. And he was like from the bottom of the clear cut to the timberline in like 20 seconds.
So fast.
Yeah.
And you can rip off a call, which you've done before, and like stop it. But like, where did it came from the creek bottom.
Right.
And it's going up to the timber, and it probably has a little loop or something that does. So sure, you see them in clear cuts. I just think you, instead of like relying on private land, which you can hunt, you could be consistent on private land.
Sure.
But going in the oaks, like, there's a lot of public land like really far back, and there's oaks that like no one goes into.
Right.
And they're coming in, and you will probably most likely be relatively close. It ain't going to be a 700-yard shot like a clear cut.
Right.
It's going to be probably pretty close.
Like 100 yards or less.
Yeah, I would argue and say 100 and under. I think relatively close shots. Just because it's thicker in there. Sure, you might see one on the other side, but you could probably get in close, with all those trees, and especially if it's raining, you can get in close. They're known with their nose. So they're going to catch you with their nose before their eyes, most likely.
So as long as the wind is good. Yeah.
I think the wind's the master controller. Yeah. So if you can get in a good position, the wind's in your favor, and obviously you're not on the open, like clapping your hands. Because, yeah, sure, they can see you, but, like if you're strategic and like weave in between the oak trees when it's raining, I think you can get relatively close, and I think that's a good tactic for archery. I haven't done it, but would like to.
Are you being like very quiet when you do that?
Yeah,
too?
like really coming in slowly.
Like blacktail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, walk 10 yards and kind of wait for a while and just
Right.
see. Like, we did that a lot this fall, too. It's just like, what's happening? Because,
All it takes is like that little sliver of like movement. And you're like, oh, there's something over there.
yeah, and it's like feeding right into you.
Yeah.
And you're like, well, wouldn't have saw that if we didn't stop.
Right.
When I took my in-laws 2 years ago, that happened we saw 3 bears. And I took them in this area. And we literally just stopped there and we were just like looking around. And all of a sudden, 2 bears feed out of the trees. And we got to watch them for like 10 minutes, which was really cool. I mean, it was a mom and cub. She knocked down a tree. And we were in uphill with the wind in our favor. So I was like, let's just sit down and watch.
Right. Yeah, it's
Which
fun.
I'm not going to tell people to just watch a mom and cubs because I think you have to gauge the situation and feel comfortable in it. But in that moment of time, I'm like, we're in a good spot. We're leveraged. So let's just sit and watch. And we watched for like 10 minutes. And it was super cool to watch.
That's awesome.
Yeah. I think that kind of answers the question. I kind of rambled on a little bit. But
No, that's good. Yeah. And so like you harvested 2 bears this year?
2 in Oregon this fall, which I've never done before. So it probably won't ever happen again. But yeah.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us about that?
Honestly, I think both were pure luck because I wasn't even planning on hunting that specific area. I was actually going to another area to go look for bears.
Right.
But I can tell you a failure that happened before is I put, and that was with Chase. That was the first weekend in October deer season, and I put an 1.5-hour stock on what we like to call Pepsi can bears, which means the girth of their droppings are the circumference of a Pepsi can.
Right.
So I know based off that there's probably about 300 plus.
A big bear.
Yeah. Big mature boar. And we had spotted one at 650 and a very good spot and us on a cliff. So Chase did hand signals and I went down there and did this 1.5-hour stalk through this timber up and down these things, and it must have snuck right behind a tree, or not snuck, but like fed right behind a tree and then came down, and then he couldn't see it and I couldn't. He was giving me hand signals and then he told me he couldn't find it, so then I was kind of like searching for it, and I think I know which way it went now when I look back.
Did it wind you or just slip away?
No, I think it just slipped away. I just kept feeding. Like the wind was so in my favor the whole time. I'm like, and it didn't see me because I was going in these nooks, and it couldn't see Chase because he's so far up and high.
Right.
I just think it was like literally just nonchalantly feeding into its zone, and I was like, that bear's gonna come back.
Right.
And
He's comfortable there.
Oh yeah, I think so. It's pretty far too. It wasn't like some place that everyone has access to. Like we went pretty far.
In the wilderness.
Yeah. We went pretty far, so I think he'll still be there. I wish I could have put a reservation sign so that no one else on him, but because he was a mature boar. So anyways, that started the season. And then actually it was like 2 days later with Chase, we were actually heading up into this area and he spotted one up on like this hill. Mm-hmm. And so I got out, we were driving and I got out, and for a split second I saw his noggin and then it went over. And so when I saw the noggin, I'm like, that's a boar. Because you can kind of tell they're a little bit more blocked and not as narrow.
Like bigger foreheads.
Yeah,
Like
just
wider
more blocky,
profile.
wider. Yeah, and the salves are a little bit more narrow. And when I saw its head, I'm like, okay, that's a boar. And then it goes up and disappears. It's like super thick. So I get out and I run up like 100 yards, 150 or whatever. And it's this steep bank, of course. And there's like 3 roots. And I kind of estimate based off where I think he's going to go up this side hill to go over here. And I sprint up. And I have to like jump and hang on the roots because it's so steep. It's literally just like, it was verbatim, that situation. Where like I was like, okay, cut off here, sprint here, jump the roots, and then climb. So I climbed up with my rifle, got onto this hill, and I took. First off, it's super thick, as thick as can be, and I probably took 5 to 6 steps, and that thing stood up at 7 yards right along a tree.
Dang!
And I raised up and shot.
That's awesome.
And
7 yards,
and it fell right below me. I mean, it was like a few feet away from me, and it did. sometimes depending on the situation, they'll do like a death moan. Which if someone hasn't heard it, like Chase hadn't heard it at the time, so he was like freaking out with what that was. But it's like a weird end of the line kind of moan that happens, and it happened right before me. I mean, I was like reloading, getting ready, because I was like, holy shit, this is gonna get Western.
Close quarters.
Very close,
Yeah.
which I wouldn't recommend with the scope, but I don't know why I didn't take my open sight. I always carry an open sight, because if you shoot a bear
In a situation like that.
yeah, which we should cover later on, like one of the number one things I think you should do if you are hunting fall bear, like bring an additional weapon, but we can cover that later. Anyways, yeah, I used a scope at close quarters and did the death moan, and so I came down the hill, and of course, like 7 yards, like your adrenaline's up, so I was like jacked up.
Yeah.
And Chase's like, "Oh my god, what happened?" All these things, and I was like, "Dude, we just harvested a bear, a like partial cinnamon. It has like a cinnamon strip on the top." And so
You got pictures of him too.
yeah, we got pictures. Actually, the fur's getting tanned right now, and the skull's getting whited out.
Oh, cool. We can throw some of those pictures in here and show
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah, Chase was like super pumped. It was really cool. It was really cool because he's never ever been a part of a
He hasn't
situation.
hunted a lot either, has he?
No, just like off and on, maybe in high school.
Sure.
So I think this was like a whole new world. He's like, "What just happened?" And then we went up there and like I walked him through like skinning and everything. He's like, "This is crazy," you know, this whole different world. So we got super lucky on that one. Got the meat, brought it back down, and yeah. So that was kind of the first one, and the second one was another lucky situation because I wanted to actually go to an area where I had seen bears before, and that was with Jake. And Jake had already shot a deer, and he's like, "Man, I'm really excited for you to take me to this area." And it's like this area, there's no clear cuts, and it's super thick. It's like it's like Alsea.
Oh, gotcha.
It's like the southwest version, like coastal range of Alsea, like
a rainforest, basically.
you see like 4 feet in front of you.
Yeah.
And I was like, I've been here before. I've seen bears. So we were actually headed there. And when we were headed there, I did this. I don't know why, and I've had this happen before in my life where I have like these weird, I guess you can call them gut feelings. I don't really know how else. I don't have the terminology to express it.
I feel like
but
gut feelings are real, though.
I guess because there is more brain cells in your gut than your brain. But anyways, whatever I felt, I freaking looked back when we were going through this area. I looked back while we were driving, and like 150 yards away or whatever is a bear just feeding in the grass, like in these ferns and everything. And I immediately was like, "Bear." And so I kind of drove up another 50 to 60 yards, pulled over. Jake's like, "What's going on?" I'm like, "Literally, there's a bear right over. I'm going to go stalk that bear." And so I ran down this area and then dumped off the side, and well, not really off the side, but kind of went on like this really old cat road, like
Right.
old. And I saw it like at 120-ish yards, and then I had set up, and I'm like, "This shot doesn't feel good." I was like on my knee because I just have a history with offhand, and I need to get better because I've missed shots at offhand.
That's something I've noticed about you is you always, like, in all the situations we've been in, you always get a very good, like, rest. And if you don't feel good about it, you're like, "I'm not going to take the shot."
I'm not perfect because I definitely, like this year with the buck that I shot, it was at 40 yards. And I don't know what happened on the first shot, but I offhand it, and I either shot underneath or over its back. And so then I did my regular rest and then got it. Mm-hmm. So I definitely ain't perfect because I literally shot right over its back at 40 yards.
Right.
So offhand is just...
something you want to work on.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like disciplined, and I felt really disciplined in this situation. I was like, I actually set up... Jake saw me set up 2 or 3 times where I was on my knee looking down the scope. And I said, "No." And then I moved, and it moved. It was like a chess match, kind of.
And it didn't know you were there.
Didn't know I was there. And it was kind of feeding in these different angles, and his backside was turned towards me. And I was like, I'm not going to force anything. Mm-hmm. Nothing needs to be forced. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't line up,
Right.
I was patient. So it was just kind of chess piece. And then I got probably to within like 70 or 80 yards, and it turned in a direction that I felt comfortable. and I set up how I wanted to with my elbow on my knee because there was no stands or anything, and took the high shoulder shot, which that is something we should talk to Dylan about because he's looked into the nerve complex in the shoulder region and how it aligns with like the spine and everything. And bears are like notorious where even if you like get a really good vital organ shot, that they'll like run off for like 100 to 500 yards. And they'll go in like the thickest stuff so they can't be found. So I did high shoulder shot and it dropped, which is exactly what I wanted, because if it ran off in that area,
it would have been so hard to
it would have been so hard to track.
Yeah.
So I got super lucky with that. And then I went back to the truck and grabbed my open sight. And this is where now I can kind of talk about like why I have another gun. If you're not doing a backcountry hunt, I think you should have an open-sighted, some kind of caliber. So like either a 30-30, a 45-70, I carry a 300 Savage, one of those three, or a 12-gauge pump. Like
with slugs.
With slugs, yeah. Like one of those just have, because they're just so notorious for, one, I've heard of faking dead. In other camps where a bear would fake dead till they got close and then try and swipe.
Right.
Which actually the very first bear I ever harvested hid behind a log and tried when Dylan and I, get closer.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Sorry. The first bear that I ever harvested actually did that, where it went into like a creek bottom, hid behind a log, and then we walked up and it was waiting right there. And so we backed out. It was like right before dark. And we didn't have another close-sighted gun. So I think if you're going to hunt fall bears and you're not like too far out in the country, I would definitely recommend having an open sight of some sort.
Or
sure.
Do you bring a pistol or anything?
I haven't. I need to get better. I've brought pepper spray.
Right.
I haven't brought a pistol because I'm like, I don't want extra weight on me. But I think that's probably not the best route to go. I think it's pistol and pepper spray.
Right.
Because they're unpredictable and things can turn around really fast, which I have heard about and seen when I was growing up with bears, And I've also had a charge in the eagle caps once, which we can talk about later. But so went to the truck, got the open sight, and then just double checked everything, and it was good. So those were kind of both the situations with it. But I would definitely recommend, if someone's interested in doing this, to have one of those open sights or something, because I can't tell you how many times people have told me like they hid behind something, fake dead,
right,
or whatever, and just try to do a little swipe, like a little last minute thing. So whenever I approach, I always grab a rock and throw it multiple times, and then I circle it. Like I know there's some and that's just my process. I know some people just go straight up to it and touch the fur, but I've heard of too many situations of people where walking up and then all of a sudden it sprung to life.
Right.
I don't know. I like playing it conservative. So
yeah,
a few rocks, circle.
Yeah, make sure it's
I'm
done.
going to stand back and wait. Have you seen the claws?
Yeah.
One swipe.
You have to respect them for sure.
Oh, with the utmost.
Yeah. So like, if you're hunting by yourself, you're going to approach that way differently than if you're like, if you and I went out, maybe one of us would have an open-sighted gun and the other one has a rifle with a scope for those situations.
Yeah. You mean like if a bear was harvested and I was by myself? I would do the same situation where I'd go get one of those open-sighted ones and I would do the rock and I would do the toss around. I would still do that. In fact, both of those situations I was by myself. And I almost feel like when I'm by myself, I'm more in tune with like what's happening. And I'm not saying I don't like with hunting with people because it's a freaking blast. But I know with bear hunting specifically, when I'm by myself, I'm like really tuned in. Right. Like super tuned in because there's just so many things that could happen so quick. But I would do the same situation. I'd have my open sight. And I'm getting better at bringing that. And I'll have a pistol this year. Cool. So that's kind of how this fall went, but very lucky both situations. And I mean, I can't tell you how many. It's not always like that. Like I've missed bears with rifle. I've missed the number one miss I regret is with a bow. I think I've told you that.
The cinnamon bear.
A cinnamon bear in the backcountry at 72 yards. That's like probably the most regrettable miss I've ever had in my hunting career.
And it happens. I mean,
No, it definitely like totally it happens. I think just the situation with me by myself doing this, one of the best stalks I've ever done, you know, an hour-long stalk to get in position and running down this mountain and coming up and like we're like way out in the Eagle Cap, so it's not like it's, you know, oh, there's like trails here and there's clear cuts.
It's wilderness.
Just yeah, it's like super far back. So to have a chance at like a good cinnamon, really mature boar with a bow is probably once in 1,000 years,
right.
you know?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it'll happen again, but yeah, it's definitely, I've missed my fair share of bears, no doubt.
Right.
Yeah. And I mean, we saw in August, a few bears in the high country when I went down there just for a weekend, just to kind of look around. And I also...
Do you think the population, sorry to interrupt you,
Oh,
but
you're good.
do you think the population is bigger down south on the coast than it is up here, say like outside of Portland or Salem or something?
You know, I'd have to err on the side of I don't know if I can give you a concluding answer. I'd have to look at numbers and data.
Well, I know they give out like for that Southwest spring bear, they give out like 4,000 tags.
Yeah. So one could maybe assume that the Southwest has more,
right,
when you look at that. And I mean, if you look at purely like tag allotted, then one could say it's definitely holding more, which it seems to me like there's more feed than the east side because it's more open.
Right. That's what I was going to ask you too, is like, I've been out in Alsea or like out around Newport and Walport, and it's like there's a ton of bear sign on all these old cat roads along the bottoms of these creeks, and they're debarking trees and you can tell they're there, but it's like, how do you hunt them when everything's so close? Like you can see 20 yards, you know what I mean?
Yeah. In those specific situations, where it's like super thick and there's clearly evidence and sign, I think it's just figuring out how you're going to get into that area with the wind in your favor for the afternoon.
Oh, and wait until...
Yeah. I mean, that's one approach, because like maybe come like at 3 p.m. and you're like, oh, there's a bunch of berries.
Once the thermals have switched.
Everything's changed. The wind's in your favor. Like everything's working. You have an entry point where you know you're not going to disrupt where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. And I think that's maybe the best, without like putting up game cameras or anything.
Right.
That's probably how I would do it, or
Gotcha.
attempt, you know? I mean, it could be done. It's just obviously where it's that thick, you kind of only have like that one window.
Right. That's what I'm wondering, like tree stands maybe. And but I don't know how often bears like use the same trail, like in and out of places. I don't know I've never bear hunted, so.
Yeah. I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying with like, it depends on how much human interaction, how much cover, water, and food. And I mean, like in Alsea, there's just, when you go deep in there, how many humans are going back?
Yeah.
Probably not a lot. Mm-hmm. So you could assume maybe that they do feel comfortable in that area. So you could put up a tree stand, maybe get cameras, figure out the timing sequence
when
in
they're
the
coming
fall.
through, where they're coming from.
Yep. And then just make sure you set the tree stand up so the wind's in your favor, even though you're higher up. I still think you have to get it in the favor if you're going to hunt like the afternoon or something, all the way to dark. And just, I would approach it probably like that.
Cool.
Yeah. Which I'm not saying I don't think there's one way. There's so many different ways to hunt bears, but that thick area, I mean, I would take a guess and say Alsea's holding some really mature boars that have some have maybe never seen humans.
Right. I think there's elk out there like that for sure.
Oh, it's definitely elk. Yeah.
Cool. Well, so like, say someone wants to get into bear hunting, maybe they've deer hunted or elk hunted, they've never been out. Like what advice and like what things should they do to get ready for that?
Oh boy.
Like if you were just starting.
Yeah, just starting. Someone brand new. Is this assuming that they've hunted before in general, like deer?
Sure, maybe they've deer hunted
a little bit. I think it starts with figuring out what location or what area unit you're going to be hunting. So it's figuring out that, and if you've been there before, and then just trying to gather some intel. So sure, maybe you go out in the summer or you go in the spring and you just walk around and like observe, try and figure out like, hey, oh, there's droppings here and you'll be able to tell because it's got plant matter in the spring, you know, or it's got like hair from deer, so you'll be able to tell like what's going on, or debark trees. Like just gather some intel. So I think it just starts with where you're going to hunt, and then you know, maybe you're familiar with these mountain ranges, so like just walking around observing, specifically looking as like, you know, a crime scene investigator, what's going on in the area, and then just gathering intel, going back in August, figuring out like what does it look like, what are they doing, stuff like that. I think it's gathering information to figure out like, okay, what's entirely happening here, and documenting how it's changing each month, especially from spring.
Because they're more active spring through like early summer, probably, I would guess.
What do you mean, like moving around?
Yeah, like my experience out in the woods, I haven't seen a ton of bears, but the ones that I have seen are usually in July and August when I'm scouting for elk.
Yeah, I mean...
And then as the season progresses, it's like I see less and less.
And that could be maybe there is like more human interaction, driving, people walking around. So maybe they're like getting pushed, you know. The food sources are changing, so that's changing. It could be, I mean, there could be a variety of reasons why you're seeing less in that time frame. I know that as soon as like deer season happens, it seems like they're definitely like, oh, there's things happening. There's people trouncing around the woods looking for deer. So now like their patterns are going to change.
Same as deer. Then.
Yeah, same as deer, you know, so that's like changing. So I think just gathering intel, that's a good start. Figuring out what what the food sources are in your particular region that you're hunting, whatever state that is, especially if it's Oregon. And then making sure you feel adequately equipped with your rifle, your firearm, all that stuff. Like you feel comfortable. You also know the anatomy of a bear because the organs sit back just a tad bit and up higher than a deer. So just knowing that, looking at, I would watch YouTube videos on good shot placement because there's a variety of shots, you know, frontal, broadside, or that high shoulder like Dylan has brought to us. And then just kind of gathering as much intel, so there's going to be a lot of learning that takes place if someone was to first go out. But the more intel you can just gather based off food sources, shot placement, how you feel comfortable, behavior, you know, all those things, because the more you see them, you'll start learning more behavior. Like what they look like, why is it drifting aside but still watching me? Oh, it's keeping a tab. It's not pressured, but it sees you. You know, like you start learning like their language a little bit. Or what do you do if a mom is with cubs close by? You know, situations like that. I think it's gathering intel before you decide to just like jump in the fire, you know? Because I just think things can, that's what I was brought up, is gathering as much and just being prepared as much as possible, which I think I've failed with not bringing a handgun. Because I made the lame excuse that it's too heavy because of some of those backcountry hunts. So I need to get better at that, which I'm going to this year. And
it's probably different now that you have kids and a wife. And
that definitely changes.
So you think about things a little differently.
Yeah. I am not willing to scale 300-foot cliffs to find spring bears in Idaho anymore, like I maybe would have. I'll figure out a way around or something. But yeah, I think it's just getting comfortable with all the food sources, being comfortable with your firearm, all the things that could potentially happen. What happens if it does charge? You know, I've been in a situation where I've seen false charges. So kind of like being comfortable in those zones. Well, not really comfortable, but just thinking about situations, and not that you can prevent everything, but just being a little bit more aware. I think it's just awareness of what that looks like, because I've seen that, and when I was growing up, I've also seen a group of guys in the camp that my brother, my father, and parents and everyone was hunting, and they harvested they had taken a shot at a bear, and it ran straight down at one of the guys. And it's not because necessarily the bear saw him and was going to kill him, wanted to kill him. That was the easiest path. And
after it got shot,
it happened to be the path he was in. So then multiple guys step up with a handgun and empty 11 rounds in the skull, and it falls 5 feet before them. That's a lot of rounds.
That could have been a bad situation.
That could have been really bad.
But they were prepared, and they were prepared.
They had their handguns, but I'm just saying, like, it wasn't running after them what they thought based off the behavior and everything. Like, oh, I see you. It was, no, this is the easiest path. And from my experience and from things I've read and talking to others, like they really like the path of least resistance, which is why you see a lot of them walking along the logging roads.
The old cat roads.
Yeah, the old cat roads, because, you know, it's easier. There's less calories burned, you know, all that stuff, which is kind of I think something to think about if you decide to do any calling too.
Right.
You know, calling in.
Have you had success with calling at all? Or?
Not success in harvest. I was close. We called in 2 this year. One to probably about 150 yards, and then it circled and winded me. And the only reason I knew it was in this canyon was because a tree fell down. So I assumed it was a bear, and it was, because then you could hear it making its way up, but then it circled me. And the other one, where that was a 50-50 coin flip, where it could have went in my favor really quick. And we were actually looking for deer, and I was with my father-in-law, and I looked in this clear cut for like 2 hours, and I just couldn't find anything. And so I was walking back up, and he says, "Hey, are you ready to go back?" And I said, "Yeah." And as we were talking, I hear blue jays like 200 yards away going berserk. And right there and then, I'm like, that's a bear. Because typically, from what I've seen, is when they're debarking trees, like pine trees or Douglas fir or whatever, like they're ripping it off because they want that little third layer, because it's like a starchy carb kind of to them. When they're doing that, birds sometimes will get territorial and start freaking out. And gotcha. Squirrels.
Right.
So like, there was like 10 blue jays screaming. And what's funny is in that corner, Dylan had already told me that there had been a very mature boar. He thinks Pepsi can mature, that was sighted in that area. So I already knew there was a really big bear. So as soon as that rattled off, I'm like, there's a bear. Let me grab my call. And so then we got set up, and there was kind of 2 paths that I thought it could come into, like going back to what I said, the easiest path. And so I had my father-in-law watch my back on this side because I just couldn't see it. And I watched this one little slope where I'm like, if he circles down, he's going to come right here. And so I started doing the call, which I started slow, and I started heating it up a little bit louder. And it was a rabbit distress call. It was like super cheap Primos, yeah. Yeah, Primos, yeah. You can pick those up for like 10 or 15 bucks. So I started ripping on it, and within 2 minutes, the birds started moving. And they were like a little hovercraft. And they just kept falling. And I was like, I know. And Bruce knew exactly where it was too, which was really cool, because like they were hovering and you could just hear the birds traveling with the bear. And I was like, he's coming. And so he came all the way down, and this was like a 10-minute thing, just wandering down in the timber. And we're like 20 yards off the timber line. And all of a sudden it comes, and it's like coming right to the tree line, and the brush is shaking. And I'm like, here we go, 10-yard shot.
Yeah.
And so I'm kind of on this spot, a little bit of a hill, so it's kind of a little drop down. And I get on my knee, and I'm like ready, and I still have the call in my mouth, and the brush stops like right at the tree line, and I can't quite see. It's like pretty dark. I don't want to force a shot. That's the last thing you want to do with bear hunting, is like assume, oh, it's big, it's right there, I can just shoot wherever. Never do that. Just wait, be patient, wait, because if there's one you want to make a good shot on, it's a freaking bear.
Well, and that's hard too. Like you mentioned that earlier, like if you didn't feel good about the shot, but I think like when you're new to hunting, especially, like seeing an animal and you're like, oh, like I can get that shot, you know, like you just want to take it, where like the more experience you have, you're like, hey, they're not scared. They're not going to go anywhere. I can set up in a better position. So like that's a skill that's like learned, I feel like. Yeah,
totally. I would totally agree with that. Yeah. And not to say that like I'm perfect with it, but I think just the more exposure you get to it, you get a little bit more discipline, especially if you like really take a step back from the situation. Because I could have forced a lot of shots on that bear. But I would almost rather it walk off with no shot than force a shot, wound it, not find it, because there's way more regret down that path than letting it go. And most likely the whole like, I'll never get this opportunity, I probably will.
He'll probably be back in there.
Or somewhere else.
Right.
And, you know, like you'll probably get another chance. Most likely if you're like working really hard. You don't know when it's going to be. But you'll probably see another bear at some point. So it's not the end of the world if it goes off, but yeah, I think, where was I going with that? I just kind of lost train of thought. Oh yeah, the calling. Anyways, I set up, and so the brush starts shaking and all that stuff. It stops, and here's where I made the mistake, because the wind was good the whole time. No issue with the wind. Is I was on this knoll looking down, and I peeked up just a little bit because I thought it was coming down low and then going up.
Straight up.
Yeah. And so I'm like, I think it's right there. And so I went like this, and I bet by me doing this, he was watching in that spot. He saw my head raise, bolted. And he's like, nope, that's not a thing.
Because it was done after
It was done. It was like dead quiet.
Yeah.
No bears, no birds. The birds didn't make a noise, and that's usually a telltale sign that gone.
Yeah.
Dust in the wind. Like, he sprinted off. And he's a bigger bear. He's probably more mature. The only downfall is from what I've learned from some that have hunted bears for decades, is bears can get educated really fast on calling. So you might not be able to call that same bear in with the same call.
Right.
So if I go back into that area, I'll probably bring a different call just to see. Not that you can't, not that it's never going to happen, but I've just been told that. I've read it, multiple times.
I feel like the same is with elk, though. Once they've heard certain calls or like the hoochie mama over and over, they're like,
oh, I know what that is.
Yeah, exactly.
You bought that at Sportsman.
I saw a guy with camouflage on pressing the button. And like, they're not gonna, yeah, they're smart.
I
Yeah.
saw a guy with camo. He's using that one at Sportsman. It's $7.99. I've heard that.
Yeah, that
it's
sounds
replicated
new.
based off Angela.
Yeah. So
Yeah, the calling is, I haven't done a ton of it. I wasn't raised on calling. That's just something that we had started messing with. But I did pick up a Fox Pro. And I'm excited to use that because it goes to like 200 yards. And now I don't have to have the call in my mouth, because when the call's in your mouth, you're kind of exhausted. And so now you're winded, and now a bear's coming in.
and they're bringing it right to you when they're like, that's where the call's coming
like
from.
you are the bait.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like I'm ripping on it, and it's like I'm literally the bait, and I'm baiting this bear in.
Right. It's a little different
I
situation.
would rather use the Fox Pro with the.
So you probably don't want to, on a solo hunt, call bears in or predators in.
For probably 99% of the public, I would definitely advise not to. Someone who's hunted decades and decades, sure, maybe after all the experiences, and they feel really comfortable. You have to feel really comfortable, I think, for
It's
that.
their choice, too.
Yeah, it's their choice,
yeah.
totally. I wouldn't encourage someone to do it when they're first starting out. But the whole Fox Pro thing, I think, can definitely, give you a little bit more comfort knowing that, oh, the speaker's 200 yards away.
Right.
I'm on a remote control. I'm not out of breath. And I can watch everything.
You can get up high. Yeah.
Yeah. With that call in your mouth, you're calling, but like there's so many things that could be happening that you just don't see.
Or hear.
Oh, yeah. Dude, it rings your ears.
Yeah, when you're ripping a call and there's something moving in the brush, you can't hear that.
I know that. I mean, unless it was like the situation I was in, the Blue Jays were so loud, but still, I'm not against that call. I'll still use it every once in a while, to stop one, maybe if it's running off. But the Fox Pro, I'm pretty excited to use just to test it, just to see.
Yeah, that'll be
I've
cool.
heard that it's worked pretty well.
We should go out and shoot some coyotes with it or something.
Yeah, cougars. I'm pretty eager to really look at cats when the fawns drop. I don't know if there's a ton of people using Fox Pros specifically going out and hunting cats.
With like fawn decoys. And
Yeah,
stuff.
like specifically like they're going out for that. It's more like people shoot cougars during
when they
rifle deer
stumble
season.
on them.
Where it's lucky, I think it'd be cool to like set up a camp and designate like 5 days and be like, we're going out with Fox Pros.
For cougars, and that's it.
That's it.
Yeah,
Like
that'd be
designating
fun.
time, be like, okay, let's figure out where their little areas are for bedding. Let's figure out the dropping. I think that would be super cool. I don't know if it's being done a lot in the state. And there's
Right.
lots of cats
Yeah.
killing lots of deer. And obviously more and more hikers are getting attacked too, certain situations.
Coming in contact with them. Yeah.
Well, we start building more houses in the woods and like, what do you
And
expect?
the population has went up, I would say, probably.
Yeah, I think the same year that baiting got banned in the state is when dogs got banned. So like 19, don't quote me on this. I think it's like 1994, 1995 is when that policy or that bill got passed, and you weren't able to bait bears or use dogs for trained cats, which are, depending on who you ask, they can really help with conservation efforts in terms of keeping balance or populations in balance. Because when populations go out of balance, that's when you have bears or cougars coming into suburban areas, potentially breaking into trash cans, killing dogs, all that stuff, and just causing mischief in the general public who shouldn't probably be, they don't want to be near those animals. So, it all comes down to management. So if the state thinks that, or whoever decides on the votes and how that whole legislative process works, however the management, if the biology shows that it supports that, sure. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And I can't make that call,
Right.
I think there's a lot of layers to those.
Oh, yeah. I don't know if there's a right or wrong answer.
I don't either. But in Idaho, you can still do those things. And I know that that's pretty common. There's quite a few hunters that do that. And
would you say if you're seeing like a ton of deer or a ton of elk in an area, is like that healthy population, does that tell you that there's less predators or that does that make sense?
Yeah.
Are there less predators, or is there just a healthy population and a good balance of deer to cougars or bears? Or
I think that's a great question, and I'll give you a few answers. One thing that comes to mind is, like I said, is erring on the side of what the data suggests. So like what numbers are being counted by biologists, colored and all that stuff. So like actually looking at that and being like, what's happening in real time. So I guess that would be one answer. I don't know what that looks like. The other answer is based off experience. I've been in zones where there's high populations of deer, and there's literally like 40 yards from deer are bears. And so do they coexist sometimes? Sure.
Right.
Depending on the environment, what food source they're after and all that thing. So I think that's a great question. Probably depending on the area, how much human interaction there is, what the data, I think just always the data from biologists and what they're collecting really shows in real time a lot outside of you just going and stomping on the grounds, like what's going on. But I guess like what would be when you've seen elk in Alsea or other areas and then there's lots of elk, are you seeing bear and cougar sign?
We, like this year, we're hunting in the lower Cascades, and there was so many deer. Like every day we were out, tons of deer, saw lots of elk, and we saw one bear with 2 cubs, and that was from like August until the end of November. And there was like hardly any bear sign anywhere. Yeah, we didn't see any cougar sign, so it tells me maybe there's not a lot of predators. I don't know.
Yeah, there might not be a predators. They might have like a state trapper, especially because it's private timber. Like making sure like the population stay in check, because they lose. I mean, after they debark a tree like a bear, that's like 1 to 2 years and it's dead. Yeah, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is.
Like there was a patch of trees 2 years ago. I took my in-laws. We counted 17 pine trees. Pretty sure they're pine trees. I'd have to think, yeah, pine trees. They were debarked.
Right.
In one spot.
Yeah.
Dead.
Yeah.
So maybe it's that. Maybe, I think if you and Josh, when you start going out in these areas, if you start consciously looking for sign too, I think that's going to be interesting. Like maybe you see the same amount of deer, but now you're consciously looking for cougar and bear instead of just solely looking for deer.
Right.
And I wonder if that answer changes.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like
if
you start like looking for it, I'm not saying it will. I just wonder if there is more sign. If there isn't, then
well, I wonder too, like the diversity of plants in private timber is typically not as high, I would say. Like they replant with all Doug fir. You know what I mean? And like, so there's not like a ton of hardwoods. There's not a ton of oaks. And I just wonder if that changes like the feed for them. And maybe that's why there's less of them.
All 100. I mean, most it seems like are food driven. So if we can figure out the food source, so yeah, maybe that could be like.
And they spray those clear cuts. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it is. Maybe it's not the adequate food source that the bears need. I mean, most of their diet is plant matter. Cougars, obviously, it's protein source, but Yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to a game warden or biologist for that specific area to see what kind of activity, is. I still think you can, if you like adequately put time into thinking about looking for predators and you put a plan in place and you're like, this is where we're seeing evidence, even if there's maybe not a lot, especially with the call, I think you
could
might
find
be able
success.
to reduce those odds.
Right.
I think you guys could go down there and, I mean, you saw bears.
Yeah.
There might not be as much action as the coastal range where there's so much abundance of feed. But I'm sure there's creek draws where you guys hunt,
Yeah.
right?
That's where we saw that mom and 2 cubs came into like 60 yards to us.
Creek
Was
draw?
in like this big drainage where everything came together.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. As soon as I look on Onyx in that area, I'd be like, look in where all of them meet. I'd be like, go down there.
Yeah.
Find the wind in your favor and just like be really slow and just kind of observe,
Work
study.
your way through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well, is there anything else you wanted to touch on?
Oh,
or?
God. I think that's it. I think if anyone's interested in getting involved, I think just like we talked about earlier, is like figuring out your why, gathering as much intel as you can, being proficient with your tool, whatever that is, bow, rifle, all that stuff, and watching videos, shot placement, anatomy of the animal, learning about their behavior a little bit, talking to biologists, game wardens, really just being a student.
Right.
I guess what it comes down to is being a student for that specific species, and then really just getting out there and getting a little bit of experience. And I think especially going with someone who's been in those situations
Right.
will probably save you a lot of years.
Yeah, because if they have 20 years of bear hunting experience and you have 0, you automatically kind of get that 20 years and then you can start building on it.
You save a lot. Yeah.
Right.
You can save a lot of time and learn at a fairly fast rate, depending on how quick you are with absorbing information and just like really learning like what they look for.
Right.
Yeah. So I definitely would advocate for someone, if they're getting out, is to go with someone that has been out before, just to get a feel for it and like really expanding. You could do that with any species though. If someone really wants to hunt blacktail, absorb information, go with someone who's hunting blacktail, and like you'll be way ahead of the curve than just like kind of doing it yourself, which you could do it if you don't have any mentors. It's totally possible. It's just going to take a lot more work.
I was going to say too, if you guys have questions or like topics that you want answers on, like you can follow us on Instagram and Facebook and our YouTube channel, and you guys can submit questions and follow us, and like you can reach out to Linden or I or whoever, and we can help you guys out with that too. So
Yeah, maybe we could set up some kind of bear hunting clinic or something in the future. That'd be fun. A little Southwest bear hunting clinic.
That'd be cool.
Yeah.
For Oregon.
Yeah, specifically for Oregon. I
Yeah.
think that'd be kind of neat. I haven't seen something like that. That'd be fun to do. A little presentation on that. So
Cool. Well, thanks guys. And yeah, feel free to follow us on Instagram and Facebook, YouTube, all that good stuff. And we'll just keep coming at you with more information and podcasts.
Cool.
Thanks, Linden.
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah,
Thanks,
it was
man.
fun.
Yeah. Dude, that was good.